why don't we go ahead and get started with today's class session titled Labor Recruitment Challenges in Cold Storage. Again, I'm really pleased to welcome our guest speaker today, Mr. John Santagate. John is Vice President of Robotics for Kerber Supply Chain. And let's get underway. Again, my name is Thomas Goldsby. I am the Haslam Chair of Logistics and Professor of Supply Chain Management at the Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I also serve as co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business Logistics. And again, really pleased to be joined by our guest speaker today, John Santagate. John is Vice President of Robotics at Kerber Supply Chain. He's been with Kerber for just under a year, having fulfilled leadership roles in a variety of capacities, including research, consulting, and sales in the life sciences and high-tech industries. John is also an instructor at his alma mater, the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Well, John, I'll turn things over to you in just a few minutes, but please allow me to go over a few items for our guests and allow me to set the stage for you. So, some of you may be joining us for the first time, and if so, we graciously welcome you to our masterclass series. Others perhaps have been with us before and know the ground rules, but those of you that are new to the masterclass might be wondering why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Well, we're here to tackle the challenges of today's increasingly complex supply chain, bringing you best practices and innovative thinking from academics like myself and industry insiders and senior leaders like John. What we're trying to accomplish is to provide guidance and insights in managing your supply chain as a competitive advantage, a strategic resource, an opportunity to excel, ultimately to conquer that supply chain complexity. And cold storage, perhaps more than other areas of business, present unique challenges, and that's why we need to have unique value-added insights. And you see that we have a 5-course masterclass dedicated to cold storage trends. Today's session is squarely in the middle of the 5-course sequence. If you missed one of the previous sessions that we held last week, those sessions are available on demand, as will today's session will be available on demand within 48 hours of the close of the session. So just know that if you do miss a session, you can go back and pick it up at a later time. But with that understanding, let's go ahead and go over some housekeeping items. All of your phone lines are muted. As indicated, we will be recording the class, and today's session will be available at a later time for viewing and sharing. And also, just a reminder, I encourage you to submit questions during John's comments, and we're going to reserve some time at the end of his presentation for him to address those questions. If he unfortunately cannot get to your question, we'll make sure that he gets a response to you subsequently. As indicated, we do have a handout today that's found in the GoToWebinar menu. Today's handout is titled In From the Cold, Using Innovative Technology to Improve Working Condition for Cold Storage Teams. Again, I had a chance to look at the hot off the presses report just before we went live with the sessions. It's really a great report, very timely, dealing with today's most pressing issues facing cold storage. With regard to pressing issues facing cold storage, we asked you a poll question as we were getting underway, and perhaps we can share the results of the poll. The question again was, what trends do you think present the greatest challenges for the cold chain industry? And 67% of you indicated driver and workforce shortages. And that's an interesting observation. That is what we've been hearing and seeing from other industry reports over a number of years. However, in the throes of the pandemic and the challenges we're facing, it seems that it continues to be among the most pressing issues that we face in cold storage. 50% of you indicated the next response, inability to balance demand and cold storage capacity, which is a topic that John spoke of in his last masterclass session when he was with us last month, was trying to balance the capacity with the demands that are placed against it. So that continues to be a major issue. 33% of you, a third of you, indicated the use of automation and robotics was among the greatest challenges. And we're going to be touching on that topic today as well. 39% of the growth of e-commerce, which is something we've heard from multiple speakers in our masterclass series, underscoring the rapid growth that we were experiencing before the pandemic and into the throes of the pandemic. It seems to only be increasing. And then finally, industry consolidation came in at 17%. So that's helpful, I think, in framing some of our comments for today. And in order to do that just a little bit more thoroughly, I'm going to provide just a couple of key observations, I think, that will set John up for his discussion. And as I've thought about what we're trying to accomplish in any warehouse, dry, ambient, or cold storage, it's that we have to effectively manage our people, processes, and technology to try to find the right blend to accommodate the challenges that we face. And like I said, I think this is true in a typical sort of ambient environment, but when you step into cold storage, it occurs to me that the challenges are even greater. And that's where I highlight in the lower right corner some of the particular challenges. Certainly finding labor has been really difficult, as we touched on previously, and the poll seems to underscore, but it's even more challenging in cold storage. And John is going to touch on that, provide some statistics that back that up. Also, it occurs to me that productivity can be impaired, right? We have personal protective equipment on, it's cold in there. It's difficult to perform at your best. It's also difficult, as the next point indicates, that technology, not just any old technology, will necessarily work in the harsh environment of cold storage. So the technology needs to be hard. It needs to be able to stand up to those conditions and yet still be easy to use. And then, as we talked in our last session last week with Matt Deep, talking on the safety of the issue of food safety, it also occurs to me that the stakes are often higher given the nature of the goods that we're storing and the pressure to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the goods throughout the cold chain, to make sure that we don't have any hot spots in that cold chain. And so people, process, and technology, I think, are essential in any work environment today. But what we want to do with today's topic is to emphasize how people, process, and technology need to work together in a cold storage environment. So with that, John, I'm going to turn things over to you, and maybe you can share your perspective with us.
Sure thing. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, first off, I just want to think back to the polling question where 50% of you indicated the imbalance of demand and capacity is a challenge that's facing cold chain storage. And when you think about that related to the labor shortage, which was the number one challenge indicated, the two are certainly related, and we'll touch upon that. I think the point here, though, looking at this slide, is that the imbalance of demand and capacity being the second challenge selected as most impactful is only going to get more challenging moving forward as we look at the growth projections for cold storage over the coming several years. If we look back, this market was a $160 billion market in 2018. But forecasts indicate the market for cold storage growing year over year through 2026 at 17% to reach over $585 billion by 2026. And I mean, that is tremendous growth. And we're already seeing that today as the imbalance of demand and capacity a challenge. So when we look at this chart, the question is, what does this growth really mean, and what does the growth create for the cold chain? And the first item here I want to highlight is greater capacity requirements. With greater demand, you need to support more demand, and you can only really do this by increasing capacity. And then to increase capacity, you need more space, you need more equipment, you need more resources, and you also need greater efficiency of processes. And I think that is a key point here, is driving efficiencies into the process so that the reliance on space, equipment, and resource can be mitigated somewhat. You need growth in networks. You need to think about facility expansion. The square footage will continue to increase, and you need to think about how to distribute the network, and that becomes, again, a people problem. You need to put your facilities in places where you have resources available. But as you expand your facilities and expand capacity, you need people to fill those roles and execute to these processes. You have an increased transportation capacity. The way the first response in the poll was framed indicated a challenge related to not just warehouse workers but drivers as well, and that's a challenge we've been talking about for many years in supply chain, is the ongoing and worsening driver shortages. And as you have increased transportation capacity requirements, you're moving more product, and that requires more rolling stock to move items in the cold chain, which requires more people again to fill and to execute to. And overall, this session is about the people, and really to support this sort of growth in cold chain organizations, we really need to increase the number of people that are working in the warehouse. We need to add workers to the industry across multiple roles to support this growth. It's not just in the warehouse, it's broad-based employee growth. And this is probably the most important aspect, in my opinion, in supporting this growth. But again, we can't think about strictly throwing people at the problem. As we'll talk about here in a moment, we need to engage in technology acquisition and process design that allows us to rely less on the people, rely more on technology and process to allow the people to do more. But the increase in people, it cannot and should not be proportional to this growth in demand. As I mentioned, we need to adapt to the market. We need to manage headcount in order to increase the requirements and support the demand increases. We need to bring those three elements that Tom talked about together in people, process, technology. And I think, a 17% year-over-year compound annual growth in an industry, that's already facing labor challenges, it's already facing demand and capacity challenges, really just emphasizes that point. If we can jump to the next slide here. So, the increased demand, what's really driving this? One point that I want to call out that my colleague Joe Kudo spoke about last week in his session on cold storage is increased demand for online ordering of groceries. So the way in which consumers are purchasing cold stored food products is changing, and therefore the distribution mechanisms are changing and changing the paradigm of how we fulfill to our customers. So we need to rethink and adapt to continue to be able to reach the growth in expected online grocery sales, not just people going into stores. There's changing customer preferences related to food products. We're seeing increased demand on perishable foods and animal-based products. The modern consumer is more savvy and oftentimes looking for fresher foods, but we're also seeing increased demand for frozen foods and ready-to-eat meals. Across the board, the demand on food-based cold storage is increasing. And then population growth in general, or organic population growth, is helping to drive up demand. More people require more food products. But it's not just about food. Food represents the first two largest categories of cold chain, but there's also the pharmaceutical element of cold chain. And again, when you think about population growth, more people requires more medicine to support the population. And so overall, population growth is a significant driver to the increased demand. But we're also seeing increased income levels in major markets that's driving up demand on fresher products, as well as increased urbanization, more consolidated population that are requiring, the ability to deliver more goods in a more narrow environment. And so these things together are really helping to contribute to that 17% year-over-year growth that the market's expected to see for cold chain. If we can jump to the next slide here. Now, when we think about this growth, the major thing that we're here to talk about is how do we adapt to labor challenges in cold storage. And this has been a big topic to talk about across the supply chain for several years. For the past many years, major markets across the globe, have been facing historically low unemployment rates. This has really been the leading rally cry for investment in technology to allow organizations to reduce the reliance on human workers, because quite simply, there are not enough people to fill the jobs in the warehouses in many of these major markets. Obviously, today things are a bit different. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased unemployment in the United States alone to over 13%. And the same impact has happened in many markets worldwide. So then the question is, do higher rates of unemployment mean more people available for work? And so, should labor availability now be less of a driver of change? And I strongly believe the answer to that is no. Temporarily, there are going to be more people available for the workforce. But keep in mind that when things improve back to where they were pre-pandemic, the same issue will come up. Also, we need to keep in mind that an outcome of this pandemic will be enabling distancing in the workplace and the need to keep people apart in the facilities. So, more people available because of a circumstantial event does not necessarily mean we take the foot off the gas pedal in terms of improving our processes and investing in technologies to reduce our reliance on human workers in these environments. It means there's a short-term scenario, but we need to be thinking long-term, especially as we see the kind of growth that has been forecast for the cold chain market. We can jump to the next slide here. So we also, need to think about, looking beyond just unemployment rates at a point in time. We see that since 2010, the United States has been trending downward relative to unemployment rates over that 10-year period, with the exception of the recent spike due to COVID-19. And this downward trend in unemployment has put immense pressure across all aspects of material handling industries. And this can be especially impactful during periods of peak demand. Scaling for peak, which is a topic I covered earlier in the masterclass series, often means increasing headcount for a short burst of activity. However, with the lack of people available over time, companies in material handling have got to continuously look for ways to increase productivity while relying less on headcount increases to mitigate these risks. If we can jump to the next slide here and look at the results of the material handling industry survey. Unsurprisingly, unemployment rates as high as they have been, hiring and retaining workers has been a top challenge for companies in the material handling industries. As indicated by material handling overall, and this is in general related to the broad material handling industry segment, the top challenge indicated in these industries was hiring and retaining qualified workers. But more impactfully, perhaps especially in industries that experience seasonal spikes in demand, is that 73% of the respondents to this report indicated that it takes more than 30 days to fill an open position. Now, again, keep in mind this data broadly covers material handling industries. It is not explicit to cold chain, but we see the same challenges in cold chain. If we can jump to the next slide here, driver and worker shortages have been noted as the top trend that is creating the biggest challenges in the cold chain, with 50% of recent survey respondents noting this as the top challenge. Now, keep in mind, labor issues in cold chain can be more challenging than some other environments, which makes this an even greater challenge to hire and retain workers. But one thing that we see as a positive outcome is that the quote on the left here that states, well, respondents are optimistic that advanced technology may mitigate labor shortages in the future. Finding frontline workers remains the most pressing challenge today. And so, again, we can't take our foot off the gas pedal of trying to blend together efficient processes and the right technology to enable those efficient processes to reduce the reliance on human workers in the warehouse because the human worker has been unavailable for so long. The survey results from what you see here were produced by the Global Cold Chain Alliance in their Industry Trends Report on 2020. And so also, I guess I would say, unsurprisingly, the inability to balance demand and cold chain storage capacity was also the second most pressing challenge for those that responded to this industry. So it's interesting and I guess quite not surprising to see that there is an alignment between the responses from our poll and the responses from the industry survey, as you see here. If we could jump to the next slide here then and look at the big thing here, right? Working in cold environments, it's a harsher working environment. It can be incredibly cold. The workers in these environments have to wear appropriate protective equipment, obviously due to the cold temperatures. And that means equipping these workers with technology that minimizes the need to remove personal protective equipment. Now, that said, thinking back to some of the data points from before about unemployment and the challenges, the fact that 73% of companies indicate it takes 30 days to fill an open position. The point here on the bottom of the slide where another survey by the Global Cold Chain Alliance that was done in 2019, the employee turnover study, showed turnover rates averaged 32.6% for the industry. And so, labor unavailability, high turnover, and a long time to take and backfill positions makes the human worker in these environments a very constrained resource. And so we really need to be cognizant about what we can do in the cold chain environment to, hire the right talent and retain that talent, but also minimize or reduce the reliance on human capital. And that's not to say that we need to eliminate the reliance on people in the cold chain. It's meant to say that we need to mitigate the reliance on an abundance of people. We need to be able to make a smaller group of people more efficient and more productive so that they can do more in the warehouse, that they can meet the capacity and requirements, that they can meet the demands on the industry, but that we can do so without having to scale as many people to meet those growth requirements. And so how can we do that? Let's jump over to the next slide here. So, overcoming the labor recruitment challenges, specifically in cold shortage, one area to look is salary and benefits. You're essentially asking your people to work in harsher conditions. So, it would make sense to think about paying above average to attract and hire new talent and to retain that talent. You don't want to hire and train the top talent, have them leave to go somewhere else. Employee recognition, that's something that every organization values, but perhaps it's more important when you have a challenging environment that's labor constrained with high turnover rates. Let's look to, create a workplace that employees want to be a part of, that has events and social events for the workers that reward them for the hard work and the harsh conditions that they're executing in. But more importantly, at least in my mind, and I believe in many of yours, is we need to look to technology. We need to look to technology to, again, enable the people in the cold storage environments to do more with less, to be able to, retain their PPE so that they don't have to remove their gloves to push buttons, for example. Technologies that allow us to do that. Voice technology, for one, is extremely beneficial for cold storage, as it allows workers to operate hands-free, and it allows workers to communicate with technology through voice. You augment that human's performance by deploying voice technology that doesn't require them to change their physical comfort in order to execute to the tasks that they have to achieve. And robotics, automation in general, is a technology that's designed to automate tasks. And so if you're automating tasks and relying less on people, again, you're getting the work done and allowing your people to focus in other areas. And again, as mentioned in the last time, my personal favorite area to talk about here is mobile robotics. But now mobile robotics for cold chain, it's a brand new frontier. In fact, the Cohesio Group, our Kerber company out of Australia, has deployed the first instance of a goods-to-man mobile robot-enabled fulfillment operation in a chilled environment at its customer, Gallipo Foods. This deployment has helped to reduce the reliance on humans in the picking process while uplifting operational performance of this facility. The questions often come in, can robots operate in these environments? This particular environment in Gallipo Foods is a refrigerated environment. It is not a frozen environment. So we now know that the robots can be executionable in a refrigerated environment and deliver value. They cannot traverse between temperature zones. There's certain constraints there from a technology perspective. Going from chilled to ambient, for example, will result in fogging on the sensors and cameras. But if you can keep this technology operating in a standard environment, there's certainly potential. And there's obviously ways to think about automating transfers and creating transfer zones between different temperature areas to allow for the use of this technology to help support the 17% year-over-year growth while mitigating the imbalance of demand and capacity that can be executed in this industry. So overall, we really do need to continue to look at blending process and technology to enhance the capabilities of the people in the cold chain processes. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Very good. Well, it's a compelling story, John. Thanks so much for sharing it with us.